In this video, what we're going to do is talk about some problems with equivalent ratios. This problem says that John is making a Christmas quilt with some red squares and some green squares. The ratio of red squares to green squares is shown below. So in order to solve the ratio, we need to count up each of the different color squares. So we can see here that there are 5 red squares to 3 green squares. And notice that both of these numbers only share a factor of 1, so that they're in the lowest terms that they can be. We'll continue on to the second half of this problem. The table below shows the number of each square John will use on each of his quilts. Based on the ratio above, fill in the table. So in order to do this, we need to remind ourselves exactly what a ratio tells us. A ratio is going to give us the relationship between two numbers of things. In this example, for every 5 red squares we have, we're going to have 3 green squares. We are going to have 3 green squares for every 5 red squares. So we see here that there are 15 red squares, and we don't know the amount of red squares that he's going to use in quilt 1. Well, let's just write out the ratio first to remind ourselves exactly how many there will be. 5 red squares to 3 green squares. So in this example, there are going to be 15 red squares. So now we need to figure out how many green squares he's going to make if he's including 15 red squares. So in order to get from 5 to 15, what John did was have 3 times as many as the ratio. 3 times as many. So to find this, I'm going to multiply the amount of green squares by 3 as well. I'm going to multiply this by 3 as well. So 3 times 3 is what? 9. So the amount of green squares that John will have in quilt 1 will be 9. In the second problem, we're given the green squares this time instead of the red squares. So we'll write it out again. And he has 12 green squares, but we don't know the amount of red squares. So we need to ask ourselves what we need to multiply 3 by in order to get the amount of green squares he has. So he has 12. 3 times what is 12? We can ask ourselves that, and then that would be 4. So we need to multiply this by 4. So in order to get the amount of red squares he uses in quilt 2, we need to multiply this by 4 as well. And 5 times 4 is 20. So the amount of red squares he uses in quilt 2 are 20. Let's move on to the second problem. At a park, there are 10 cats, 5 dogs, 2 birds, and 8 squirrels. And the question asks us, for every 1 dog, there are 2 what? Well, in order to solve this problem, let's just write out the ratio between each of these animals. So first we can write out the ratio of, we only need to write out the ratio of dogs to things because we know that there will be dogs in this problem, so we can start out with dogs each time. So we can start with dogs. So there are 5 dogs, and let's compare the cats. Let's compare the cats. So there are going to be 5 dogs for every 10 cats. 10 cats. And both of these numbers are divisible by 5. 5 divided by itself is just 1. 1. And 10 divided by 5 will be 2. 2. Well, this meets the criteria of the problem. There's going to be 1 dog, and there will be 2 cats for every 1 dog. So we already know that this answer is cats. There are 2 cats. But just for the sake of making sure that none of these are right, let's do the other 2 ratios. So we'll do dogs and birds now. So we start out with dogs again. There are 5 dogs for every 2 birds. Every 2 birds. So that does not meet this criteria. And then we can do dogs to squirrels. So for every 5 dogs, there are 8 squirrels. 8 squirrels. So we can reassure ourselves that for every one dog, there are two cats, and this is the only problem that, or this is the only ratio that is equal to what the problem is asking us. So let's move on to our final question. The number lines below show that 5 apples cost $11, and these number lines are showing us the rate, or how much each individual apple costs. So as you increase the apples by one, the cost is increasing at a constant rate, meaning the cost is not going to vary, it's just going to increase. So we know that each of these tally marks is going to be equal to one apple, because there are 5 of them. We can go ahead and write 1. And let's try and find the cost of a single apple. And we can go ahead and write the ratio between apples and the cost. So we have 5 apples, or let's write apples here. 5 apples to apples. 5 apples for every $11. $11. Now let's go ahead and try to find the cost of one apple, or the unit cost. So in order to get to 1, we'll write 1 apple, because we know that this is going to be this part of the ratio. 1 apple is equivalent to what cost? Well, to get to 5 from 1, we need to divide this by 5. So we're going to need to do the same thing here with the cost. So we're going to divide 11 by 5. We can write this as a fraction. We can write 11 fifths, because it'll be 11 fifths. But remember that we're talking about cost here, so I need to write it in the amount of money. Well, we can write 11 fifths as 2 and 1/5. 2 and 1/5. And then 2 plus the cent amount. So 1/5 of a dollar will be about 20. Well, it will be 20 cents. 20 cents. So the cost of 1 apple is $2.20 here.